Hello again everyone, and welcome to Stitch Bliss Corner. Mary Rose here. I'd just like to say thank you to those who leave comments. I always enjoy reading them, and I also get ideas for future videos and things like that, so I really do appreciate your engaging in that way. Now the other thing I wanted to say was an apology to Jani from Yarny Stitches. Well, I've said it again. Her videos are called YANY Stitches, and that's her name, but her name is Jani. So I just thought that I would apologise to her for getting her name incorrect. Now the other thing I wanted to say was the last video I did on Martina Rosenberg, I did show this book about Helen M. Stevens, and there were a few pictures that I showed you that I didn't do them justice. So I'm going to just show them again, because I would have been quite frustrated if I'd have been trying to see them and I couldn't see them properly. So one was this one, the fox, who is just magnificent. Look at that tail. And the other one was this one. That feather work. So now one of my commenters, Susan, she was talking about her vintage Santa that she's been stitching, and she's just starting her stitching journey, and she asked me if I had any advice about when you're starting your work with stitching. And so I'm going to give a little bit of it. I think we all find our own way of what suits us best. So I'm just going to show a few things for Susan, and then I'm going to go on to show you the beginning of my road testing of the Cezanne Harlequin that I've taken from a computer program, and the choice I've made for the Robert Frost poem, part of which I read out. I didn't read it out, I recited it because I remembered it. When I showed a picture that I did for my son that was a scene of woods, and that set me off thinking about doing a Robert Frost poem and finding the right picture to go with it, and I think I've cracked it, so I'm going to show you that later. But we'll just do this little bit for Susan first. Now here is a, just wait till I get this organised here. So Susan, if I was, for example, to do this particular picture here, this is a free one, so I can show it, I would find the centre of this particular chart, and the centre of this one is where I've marked it. Just there. That's the centre. So once I'd found the centre of my chart, I would then get my piece of fabric and I would get the centre of that as well. Now what I've done, so in other words, the corresponding square would be in here. Now I'm not showing the exact, I'll just mark it on here so you can see it. See, I've got it there on here, the centre, and then I've just marked it here on the fabric, the centre, so that you know, whatever you do with this, you know that that is the very middle of your fabric, and it's also the middle of your chart. So like a compass, you've always got that spot that you can count from and know that it's accurate and correct, which makes it a lot easier for you not to go out of place with your stitches. And if you do go out of place, you find it fairly quickly, and you can, you know, frog if you need to. I put that safety pin in there just to show that I usually mark the top as well, to make sure that because it's amazing if you put your stitching down when you're starting out anyway and you come back, it can be a bit difficult to orientate yourself. But if you know where the top is at all times, and you know where the centre is at all times, then I think it makes life a lot easier. Now, I've stitched, and in order to make the middle, what I usually do to find the middle is I go across and then I go that way and sort of, you know, scrunch it a bit, open it out, and it usually shows you where the centre is. Now I've stitched this in the darker colour, but I usually use white, of course. So that's what I do anyway, Susan, or what I've done for many years. Now the other thing is that if I'm travelling and I don't want to take my entire chart with me, I usually take a photograph of my symbols and thread colours so that I've got that with me, and I also take a picture of the chart, the section that I want. Now in this case, of course, you can do the whole chart, and then, which does help if you're just starting out, because you've got your centre, which I showed you before, and if you know that's the exact part you're working from, you can just have that little section and work off that and know that you're not going wrong because you've got that bit you're working on, and then you can work across and make that bigger. So it makes life a lot easier. And I've got a little, I do that with my big chart. I just take a picture of the section that I'm doing, and this has got a little stand on it, so I can just sit it and look at it, and I don't have to, you know, with a bigger chart you do have to be careful, because you have to make absolutely sure that that's the section, you know, it's the accurate spot, otherwise you could be stitching something that's not supposed to be in that spot. But I'm sure everyone's smart enough to be able to work out that. I'm just voicing a note of caution just in case. But you can imagine how easy it is to travel with your little chart on your phone, and also your scale there with your symbols and your colours and everything. And it's a great backup if you lose your chart or your, what am I looking for? The key to, you know, the colours and the symbols. You've always got a backup on your phone, so I do tend to do that just so that I, you know, have a way of mislaying things. Okay, so that's what I wanted to tell you, Susan. Now, if you have any other queries, please do ask me, because I'm more than happy to do that and to let you know if I've got any gems of wisdom, which I don't really have many of those, but if I do, well, I'd be more than happy to share them with you. Now, what else have I got on my list here? Don't stress about vintage whips. You know, if you've got a half-read book, you don't stress about that, do you? You just think, oh, I'll get back to that sometime. And I think it's the same with whips. I mean, whether they're vintage or they're not. I mean, you must go, with stitching, you must go where the inspiration takes you, you know. I mean, sometimes you might want to watch every episode ever made by a particular you know, a mini series or something like that, and you can't get enough of it. And then later you don't want to watch it for months, maybe years. But when you go back to it, you have the same enthusiasm. And, you know, I mean, it's important to stitch on what you want to be stitching on. You know, that's what I think anyway, because you don't get the joy of it. You know, stitching is for joy. So, of course, you do follow where your inspiration takes you. I mean, there was a girl I was watching the other day on Flosstube, and she had a piece of stitching that she'd done, quite a lot on there actually, of horses galloping out of the sea. And she said she doesn't like it really anymore, but she doesn't really want to hold on to it, but she doesn't know quite what to do with it. And I thought, well, she might have children. She might have a son one day, that, or a daughter, that would love to have, you know, she might say, oh, I'd like to do you some stitching. What would you like? And the son or daughter might say, I'd like to a cross stitch with horses coming out of the ocean. Can you do that for me, please? So even if you think that you will never need that vintage half-done stitching that you've got, there's every chance that further down the track you might need it, or someone you know might want it. So no stitching is ever a waste. I think that's what I'm saying. There always will be something or someone in the future that is going to want that stitching. So don't worry about it half being done. Big deal. It doesn't matter. There aren't any rules. It's your life. It's your stitching. It's your joy. It's yours. So don't stress. I'm not stressing. You've seen I have plenty of vintage whips. Plenty. And I'm going to be starting another one quite soon. So there you go. You go where the joy takes you. Simple as that. Now then, what else was I going to say? Oh yes, I think now I shall go on to my choice for my Robert Frost work on his wonderful poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And I'll read you the poem. Now, I've got a link down below because I found, to my elation the other day, that there are now soundtracks on the internet of the man himself reading his own poetry. And it's cracking. It's so good. So I'm going to read this, but underneath there's a link, and I you know, do yourself a favour. Just sit quietly and listen to him. It's lovely. It's lovely. Right, so anyway, here's the poem. This one, actually, he said that he awoke from a sleep, and it was like a... What did he say it was? It wasn't a hallucination, but it was like a sort of like a vision that came to him. It all came at once, kind of thing. So anyway, here's the poem. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. And it's really a metaphor for life, isn't it? You know, you'd like to stop and take things in, but life just rushes you on, and you've got miles and miles of things that you have to do. Take the kids to school and cook dinner and, you know, go to work. And I mean, women have so much to do, and I'm not leaving the men out. They also have a lot to do. I mean, it must be very difficult for male stitchers because to find the time as well, because they have so many pulls on their time. We all do. But anyway, so that's the wonderful, wonderful poem by Robert Frost. And as I say, the link down below to hear him say his own work it's a gift to us. I'm just so glad that they had sound when he was still on the earth. Now here is the picture that I chose for his poem. And I think, for me anyway, it's perfect. Now, you might say, well, that's all well and good, but it says there, winter morning, which it does. And it's a poem about the evening. But I think poetry is very much for the imagination of the reader as well. And I am imagining that this work, even though the artist has painted it for a winter morning, I'm imagining that it's an evening. And I'm imagining that not too far away it's going to be the darkest evening of the year. And I'm imagining what that scene would be like if it was just getting so dark you could hardly make it out. And I think it would still be beautiful and not in any way frightening. So that's the one that I'm going to be doing, Pinoy Stitch Organisation, Winter Morning, and it's by Joseph Farquharson. And the actual physical size will be that size when I finally stitch it. And then I'm going to have the poem alongside it. So I'm not starting it immediately because I do want to do as much as I can for the Scout's foreground that I'm stitching, because I've decided to try and do all the foreground of the Scout, which my regulars have seen before. And then once I've got the bottom part done, moving up, and then I'll do the background last, on the sky and everything. That's what I've decided to do, because I think that foreground needs to be done before I go any further up. That's my sentiments anyway, so I'm sticking to those. Now, on to the road testing of the Cézanne Harlequin. And I have commenced. Just take the hoop off. And of course it doesn't look like much at the moment. In fact, it looks a little bit of a mess, if I'll be honest with myself. So I think the bit that I've got here, naturally enough, it's in the centre anyway, because that's where I always start my work. So there it is. And you can see there's not a lot of it there, but some of the red is coming through. And I like that there's some confetti in there. You can see some, I hope it'll pick up all the different colours in there. But see, confetti, you know, it's like with the Scout, there's so much in that, there's enough for 100 weddings in the foreground anyway. Well, for the whole thing. But if you will the ends, you must will the means. That's the point. That's what I keep telling myself. You know, so many different colours in those little squares. But you want it to look the way that you've got the picture in your head. You want it to look that way. So therefore, if you will the ends, you have to will the means. And I've got all my colours for Cezanne's work on my cards, and there aren't any blended threads at all. And of course I've got far more threads really than I need, but I like to have plenty so I know I'm not going to run out, and then they all just go back into the bag anyway for the next work. So it just makes life easier for me when I look and see that I've got a ton of thread left, because there's nothing worse than looking at how much more you've got to do and looking at how much thread you've got left and thinking, have I or haven't I? So in my case, I like to have plenty. Now, was there anything else I had to say to you? I'll just have a quick look at my little list here. I don't think so. I think that's all I had to say to you this time. I just wanted to show you the Robert Frost choice and to catch up with Susan, just to give her a few little pointers of how I do things. As I say, we all have our own methods, and she'll work hers out as well as she gets more experienced. But I think some people that really would love to do cross stitch, there's always a temptation that, oh, it's too hard. You know, I'm not going there. I just don't know how they do it. That kind of mindset. When really, if you break it down into a simple, very simple steps, then I think it's not so daunting. All right, well, thank you very much for your company. I look forward to seeing you again next time. I have a few things that we're cooking up to show you, and I'll catch you again next time at Stitch Bliss Corner. All the best with your stitching, and goodbye for now. Bye.